A quiet black man with autism, dismissed and bullied by his wealthy, prejudiced neighbor, finds himself thrust into an unimaginable situation when a raging LA wildfire threatens her life. In a moment of courage and humanity, he risks everything to save the person who treated him with disdain. What follows is a tale of redemption, self-reflection, and the transformative power of compassion that will leave you speechless. In the quiet suburbs of Los Angeles, Willow Creek Estates sat as a picturesque neighborhood, its manicured lawns and sprawling homes boasting affluence and order. Yet beneath the pristine facade lay stark disparities, both racial and economic. The neighborhood was predominantly white, with only a handful of minority families calling it home. Among them was Darius Turner, a reclusive yet kind-hearted man whose small, modest house stood in quiet contrast to the grand estates around it. The community buzzed with activity, kids riding bikes, gardeners tending to rose bushes, and residents chatting over morning coffee. But Darius rarely participated, preferring the comfort of his well-worn routines. Darius, a 27-year-old black man with autism, moved to Willow Creek after inheriting the house from his late grandmother. Though reserved, he possessed an innate kindness that shone through in his small gestures, leaving fresh flowers on a neighbor's porch, offering to fix a broken fence, or gently rescuing a stray cat from harm's way. His love for routine was evident in everything he did. Every morning at 7 a.m., he swept the walkway in front of his house, ensuring it was free of debris. Afternoons were spent tending to his vibrant garden, a colorful sanctuary of sunflowers, marigolds, and lavender. Evenings often found him on the porch, flipping through books on astronomy, his passion for the stars evident in the detailed sketches he made of constellations. Yet Darius's quiet demeanor made him an easy target for judgment. Many of the residents, unfamiliar with his condition, misunderstood his quirks and avoided him. He spoke softly, avoided eye contact, and sometimes flapped his hands when overwhelmed, all behaviors that others unfairly labeled as odd. Living directly across the street was Mrs. Cora Hastings, a 48-year-old widow who prided herself on her place as the unofficial queen of Willow Creek. With her sharp tongue and penchant for gossip, Cora was both feared and revered by the other residents. Her home was a fortress of wealth, its grandiose design flaunting her status. Crystal chandeliers sparkled in the windows, her front lawn displayed a pristine water fountain, and her luxury car gleamed in the driveway. Cora's personality matched her home, polished on the surface, yet cold and unyielding beneath. She had little patience for anything or anyone she deemed beneath her. From the moment Darius moved in, she viewed him as an unwelcome intruder. To her, his modest home and quiet existence disrupted the perfection of the neighborhood. Her disdain became apparent in her subtle but cutting actions, avoiding eye contact when he waved, loudly complaining about his gardening tools being too unsightly, and once calling the homeowners association to demand he trim his hedges to her liking. While other neighbors chose indifference, Cora actively sought to diminish him. The animosity simmered for months. Cora's judgmental glances became daggers, her whispers louder when Darius passed by. Though he tried to ignore it, Darius felt the weight of her scorn. The neighbors, perhaps wary of Cora's influence or simply unwilling to intervene, stood by in silence. The tension escalated one afternoon when Darius's gardening inadvertently disturbed Cora's prized flower beds, sending stray leaves onto her lawn. Instead of addressing it calmly, she marched across the street, her voice dripping with condescension. "Do you have no respect for this neighborhood?" she snapped, her arms crossed tightly. Darius, startled, stammered an apology and offered to clean the area immediately, but Cora dismissed him with a wave, muttering, "Figures." That moment solidified their unspoken feud, with Cora ramping up her subtle bullying. Packages addressed to Darius would mysteriously go missing, HOA complaints increased, and whispers of troublemaker spread through the community. Despite the hostility, Darius remained steadfast, channeling his energy into his passions. However, the growing isolation and misunderstandings wore on him, leaving him questioning his place in the world. Unbeknownst to both, a fiery disaster was about to strike Willow Creek, one that would change their lives forever. Cora would find herself at the mercy of the very man she had belittled, and in the face of danger, both would discover truths about each other that neither could have anticipated. Cora's prejudice against Darius grew bolder over time, her whispers evolving into outright hostility. Fueled by her belief that Darius didn't belong in Willow Creek, she took every opportunity to make his life more difficult. Small, seemingly trivial complaints became her weapon of choice. One morning, Cora called the Homeowners Association to report Darius for having an unkempt yard, claiming his vibrant garden was overgrown and an eyesore. Though her complaints were unfounded, the HOA sent him a formal notice, forcing Darius to spend hours trimming his perfectly manicured flower beds. In the evenings, as neighbors gathered for small outdoor socials, Cora's gossip took center stage. "I don't feel safe with someone like that living across the street," she would say, her voice loud enough for others to hear, but just quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. She wove narratives about Darius being strange and unpredictable, feeding into biases others hadn't even realized they held. Cora didn't stop there. She accused Darius of leaving trash on her property, blamed him for a broken garden lamp near her driveway, and once even claimed he had scared her elderly dog by making sudden movements near the fence. Each accusation chipped away at the neighbor's perception of Darius, leaving him more isolated than ever. Darius, though painfully aware of Cora's actions, tried to endure them with patience. He found solace in his garden, where the colors and textures brought him peace, and in the stars he sketched at night. But her constant bullying took its toll. The HOA complaints disrupted his cherished routines, forcing him to focus on meeting arbitrary standards instead of tending to his garden as he loved. The gossip stung the most. Though he rarely spoke to his neighbors, he could feel their wary glances as he walked by. It made every step outside his home a painful reminder of his perceived difference. Social interactions were already challenging for Darius. His autism made it difficult for him to navigate the subtle cues of conversations, and Cora's hostility only heightened his discomfort. He began to second-guess every action, worrying that even a simple wave or smile might be misconstrued. On particularly difficult days, Darius would retreat to his porch, clutching his sketchpad like a lifeline. His hands trembled as he drew constellations, each line an attempt to ground himself in the universe's vast, unchanging beauty. Yet, the weight of Cora's words lingered, a heavy cloud over his once serene world. The neighborhood's annual spring festival, held in the local park, was meant to be a joyous occasion. Families set up booths selling homemade crafts, children raced around with balloons, and neighbors came together to share food and laughter. This year, Darius hesitantly decided to attend. Encouraged by memories of his grandmother, who had always loved the festival, he saw it as a chance to connect with others despite his reservations. Darius spent hours preparing for the event, crafting small paper flowers to hand out to children and baking lavender cookies from his garden's bounty. His excitement, though cautious, was palpable as he set up a modest booth near the park's entrance. But Cora wasn't about to let Darius enjoy the day. As she approached the festival, her sharp green eyes zeroed in on his booth. She whispered to a group of neighbors, gesturing toward Darius with feigned concern. "He's acting so suspicious," she muttered. "What's he even doing here?" The whispers spread like wildfire, and soon, people began avoiding his booth altogether. Darius noticed but tried to remain positive, focusing on the few children who happily accepted his paper flowers. Cora, however, wasn't satisfied. She marched up to his booth, her arms crossed and her voice dripping with condescension. "You shouldn't be here," she said loudly, drawing the attention of nearby attendees. "This is a family event, and frankly, you're making people uncomfortable." Darius froze, the words hitting him like a physical blow. He stammered an apology, his hands trembling as he clutched a paper flower. "Don't play innocent," Cora continued, her tone escalating. "I've heard the complaints. You've been causing problems for months." The crowd gathered, murmuring in confusion and discomfort. Some looked at Darius with pity, while others seemed swayed by Cora's conviction. Darius, overwhelmed, lowered his gaze and packed up his booth in silence. His carefully baked cookies and painstakingly crafted flowers lay abandoned as he walked away, his heart heavy with humiliation. As Darius disappeared into the distance, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving Cora standing triumphantly at the booth. Yet, a few neighbors who had witnessed the interaction began whispering amongst themselves, questioning whether Cora had gone too far. This moment marked a turning point for Darius. Though his quiet dignity remained intact, the pain of public humiliation fueled a resolve within him. While Cora saw his retreat as a victory, Darius silently vowed to rise above her prejudice, though neither could predict how their lives would intersect again. This time, under the most harrowing of circumstances. The wildfire began as a faint plume of smoke on the horizon, barely noticeable against the hazy Los Angeles skyline. But within hours, it grew into a monstrous force, fueled by dry winds and the parched landscape. Flames leaped across hillsides like predators, devouring everything in their path. The air was thick with smoke, casting an eerie orange hue over the neighborhood. Sirens wailed in the distance, and ash fell from the sky like snow, coating rooftops and lawns. Neighbors hurriedly packed their cars, grabbing children, pets, and hastily stuffed suitcases. Streets once alive with suburban calm now echoed with panicked voices and the honking of vehicles in frantic escape. The roar of the fire was deafening, a constant reminder of its unstoppable advance. Darius stood on his porch, clutching his sketchpad as he watched the chaos unfold. His heart pounded, not with fear for himself, but for the people around him. He saw families struggling to leave, elderly neighbors moving slower than the urgency demanded. He noticed Cora's house across the street, its pristine white walls now speckled with ash, but the windows were eerily dark. Inside her home, Cora Hastings was paralyzed with fear. The fire had crept closer than she ever imagined possible. The news had warned of evacuation orders, but she'd dismissed them, convinced the flames wouldn't reach her well-manicured neighborhood. Now, her grand two-story house was enveloped in smoke, the air inside thick and choking. Cora coughed violently as she stumbled through the rooms, her once confident demeanor replaced by sheer panic. She tried to call for help, but her phone had no signal. The electricity was out, plunging her into darkness save for the faint, flickering glow of the fire pressing against her windows. Her dog, an elderly golden retriever named Baxter, whined at her feet, sensing the danger. She attempted to gather her most valuable possessions, jewelry, documents, but quickly realized how futile it was. The fire was closing in. When she reached the front door, she froze. The flames were now licking at the edge of her lawn, the heat intense even from a distance. Her car sat in the driveway, but the keys were nowhere to be found. Her breaths came in shallow gasps as the reality of her situation sank in. She was trapped. From his porch, Darius saw the flicker of flames against Cora's windows. He squinted through the smoke, his sharp eyes noticing the lack of movement outside her house. While most of the neighborhood had evacuated, her car remained in the driveway. His heart wavered. After everything she'd done, the insults, the false accusations, the public humiliation, Darius had every reason to turn away. She had made his life a living hell, reducing him to the subject of whispers and suspicion. But as he watched the flames inch closer to her home, a deeper part of him stirred. "She doesn't deserve this," he muttered, clenching his fists. Darius grabbed a wet bandana, tying it over his nose and mouth. He filled a bucket with water, though he knew it wouldn't last long. Without hesitating further, he sprinted across the street, his boots crunching on the ash-covered pavement. The heat was oppressive, pressing against his skin like a physical weight. When he reached Cora's front door, he pounded on it with all his strength. "Cora, are you in there?" he shouted, his voice muffled by the bandana and the roar of the fire. Inside, Cora heard the banging and froze. For a moment, she thought it might be rescuers. But when she opened the door and saw Darius standing there, her expression was a mix of disbelief and desperation. "What are you doing here?" she croaked, her voice hoarse from smoke. "Getting you out," he said firmly, stepping inside without waiting for her permission. The house was a furnace, the walls hot to the touch. Darius scanned the room quickly, spotting Baxter cowering under a table. "We need to move now," Darius urged. "I can't find my keys," Cora stammered, her hands shaking. "Forget the keys, come on." Darius wrapped a damp blanket around Cora's shoulders and handed her another for Baxter. He led the way, keeping low to avoid the thickest smoke. The heat was unbearable, sweat streaming down his face as they stumbled out the front door. The flames were closer now, crackling like a sinister symphony. Embers floated through the air, landing dangerously close to them. Darius shielded Cora with his body as they moved toward the street, Baxter trotting nervously beside them. But their path was blocked. A fallen tree, engulfed in flames, had cut off the road leading to safety. Darius cursed under his breath, his mind racing. "This way," he said, guiding Cora toward the back of the house. They maneuvered through the yard, where the fire had not yet taken hold. Darius spotted a gap in the fence that led to a nearby alley. It was narrow and filled with debris, but it was their only chance. "Go through there," he instructed, pushing Cora gently toward the opening. She hesitated, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," he assured her. With Baxter in tow, Cora crawled through the gap, her movements clumsy but determined. Darius followed, the heat singeing the back of his shirt as he squeezed through. They emerged into the alley, where the air was slightly clearer. Darius helped Cora to her feet, his own legs trembling from exhaustion. He could hear the distant wail of sirens, a sound that filled him with relief. "We're almost there," he said, guiding her toward the main road where firefighters were working tirelessly to contain the blaze. As they reached the edge of the neighborhood, a firefighter ran toward them, taking Cora and Baxter to safety. Darius collapsed onto the ground, coughing and gasping for air. His arms and legs ached, but he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Cora turned to look at him, her expression softening in a way Darius had never seen before. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of saying something, but the words caught in her throat. Darius didn't need her gratitude. He had done what he felt was right, not for her approval, but because his humanity demanded it. As the flames continued to consume the neighborhood, Darius watched silently, his mind replaying the harrowing escape. He didn't yet know how this act of courage would change their lives forever. Darius tightened his grip on Cora's arm as they navigated the fiery maze of the alleyway. The air was thick with acrid smoke, burning their lungs with each breath. The heat was suffocating, the roar of the flames a constant menacing backdrop. Cora stumbled over debris, her designer shoes no match for the uneven ground, but Darius held her steady, his strength and focus unwavering. "Keep moving," he urged, his voice muffled through the damp cloth covering his face. "We're almost there." The alley was narrow, lined with tall wooden fences now smoldering from the encroaching fire. Embers floated around them, landing dangerously close to their skin. At one point, a fiery beam collapsed mere feet ahead, blocking their path. Darius didn't hesitate. "Stay here," he said firmly, gripping the edge of the beam. With a strength fueled by determination, he pushed it aside, creating just enough space for them to squeeze through. Cora followed, her breaths ragged, her once pristine appearance now marred by soot and ash. She couldn't fathom how he remained so composed. Darius moved with purpose, his focus entirely on ensuring they made it out alive. "Why are you doing this?" Cora blurted out, her voice breaking as they crouched under another low-hanging branch. Darius paused for a moment, glancing back at her. His eyes, sharp and determined, softened slightly. "Because it's the right thing to do." The simplicity of his answer struck her. There was no malice, no hesitation, just a man risking his life for someone who had given him every reason to walk away. As they pushed forward, Cora couldn't stop her thoughts from racing. She had spent years looking down on Darius, judging him for his differences, assuming the worst because of her own biases. She had whispered about him to neighbors, avoided him on the street, and dismissed him as a nuisance. And yet here he was, shielding her from falling embers, guiding her through the chaos with unwavering resolve. Her breath hitched as she recalled their encounters, the cold stares, the condescending remarks, the unwarranted complaints to the neighborhood association. Each memory now weighed heavily on her, the guilt pressing down harder than the smoke-filled air around them. She stumbled again, and Darius caught her without a word. His hands were steady, his grip firm. He didn't offer her judgment, didn't remind her of the countless ways she had wronged him. You're risking your life for me," she managed to say, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames. "We don't have time for this," Darius replied, his tone gentle but firm. "Just keep moving." But Cora couldn't help but see him differently now. His actions spoke volumes, louder than any apology she could muster. For the first time, she saw him not as the misunderstood man she had vilified, but as someone extraordinary, someone kind, brave, and far better than she had ever given him credit for. The alley opened into a clearing, the main road just beyond. The sight of firefighters battling the inferno gave them a glimmer of hope. But the path was still fraught with danger. A fallen power line sparked ominously, blocking their way. "Stay back," Darius commanded, his voice sharper now. He scanned the area, quickly assessing their options. The only way forward was to climb over a toppled fence to avoid the live wire. "I can't," Cora began, panic rising in her voice. "You can," Darius interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll help you." With surprising ease, he lifted her up, guiding her hands to grip the sturdy edge of the fence. Cora's heart pounded as she climbed, her body trembling with fear. Once she was over, Darius followed, landing beside her with a heavy thud. They were close now. The fire trucks were visible, their sirens piercing through the chaos. Darius waved frantically, catching the attention of a firefighter who ran toward them. "This way," the firefighter shouted, extending a hand. Darius pushed Cora forward. "Go," he urged. Cora hesitated for a moment, looking back at him. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she saw the exhaustion etched on his face, the streaks of soot lining his features, the quiet resilience in his expression. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Darius nodded once, then guided her toward safety. The paramedics ushered them both into a safe zone, draping them in blankets and offering water. Cora sat on the curb, her chest heaving as she struggled to process what had just happened. She glanced at Darius, who was sitting a few feet away, his shoulders slumped in exhaustion. For the first time, she noticed the details she had always overlooked. The calm strength in his demeanor, the intelligence in his eyes, the kindness that radiated even in the direst circumstances. When a firefighter approached to ask for their details, Cora spoke first. "His name is Darius. He saved my life," she said firmly, her voice breaking. The firefighter nodded, his expression one of admiration. "You're a hero," he said to Darius. Darius shook his head. "I just did what anyone should do." But Cora knew better. Not everyone would have done what he did. Not everyone would have risked their life for someone who had treated them so poorly. As the chaos began to subside and the neighborhood smoldered in the aftermath of the fire, Cora found herself grappling with a profound realization. She had spent so long seeing Darius through the lens of her prejudice, defining him by stereotypes and assumptions. But now, those walls had been shattered. Darius had shown her not just his humanity, but her own failings. And as she sat there, staring at the man who had saved her life, she made a silent promise to herself. Things would never be the same again. For Darius, the rescue was not about redemption or recognition. It was about doing the right thing, even when it wasn't deserved. And in that moment, he realized that his actions might have sparked a change far greater than he could have ever imagined. Cora sat in her dimly lit living room, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. The faint scent of smoke still lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of the wildfire that had changed everything. She stared at the flames dancing in the fireplace, her mind replaying the harrowing rescue over and over. The man she had avoided for years, the man she had whispered about to her friends, reported to the neighborhood watch for minor infractions, and dismissed with condescending glances, had risked his life to save hers. Cora closed her eyes and leaned back into the plush couch, but peace evaded her. Instead, memories surfaced, sharp and vivid. She remembered the day she had complained to the homeowners association about Darius's garden, claiming it was unkempt. The garden had been neat, filled with colorful flowers, but she hadn't cared. It was an excuse to make him feel unwelcome. Then there was the time she had chastised him for leaving his recycling bins out too long, something other neighbors did without consequence. And of course the whispers, telling Mrs. Aldridge that Darius was odd or unpredictable, implying he didn't belong in their upper-middle-class neighborhood. Now those moments made her cringe. She had justified her actions at the time, masking them as concern for the neighborhood's appearance or safety. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her prejudice had driven her to judge Darius unfairly, to see him not as a person, but as a problem. The image of his face as he carried her through the flames haunted her. His focus, his courage, his refusal to leave her behind, even when she had given him every reason to. "Why would he do that for me?" she murmured aloud, her voice thick with emotion. The realization hit her like a blow. He had acted out of kindness and humanity, qualities she had refused to see in him before. Tears stung her eyes as she grappled with the enormity of her actions. She wasn't just guilty of prejudice. She was guilty of erasing his humanity with every judgmental glance, every dismissive comment. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice barely audible. So wrong. Across the street, Darius sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the worn pages of a journal he had kept for years. Writing had always been his way of processing the world, a world that often felt confusing and overwhelming. But tonight, he couldn't find the words to describe how he felt. The fire had taken so much from the neighborhood, but it had given him something he hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. For years, he had lived in the shadow of others' assumptions. His autism made social interactions challenging, and he often felt like an outsider in a world that valued conformity. People like Cora had amplified that feeling, their subtle but persistent hostility making him question his worth. But the fire had revealed a truth he couldn't ignore. In that moment, when lives were at stake, none of those judgments mattered. What mattered was who he chose to be. And he had chosen kindness. Darius ran his fingers over the frayed edge of the journal, his mind replaying the moment Cora had thanked him. There had been a vulnerability in her voice, a rawness that suggested her words weren't just polite gratitude. For the first time, he saw her as more than the person who had caused him so much pain. He saw her as someone flawed, but capable of change. Darius stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the street. The neighborhood was quieter than usual, the fire having left a heavy stillness in its wake. He caught a glimpse of Cora's house, the soft glow of her living room light spilling onto the lawn. He wondered if she was thinking about him, if she felt the same shift he did. For Darius, the experience wasn't just about saving a life. It was about reclaiming his own. He realized he didn't need validation from others to define his worth. His actions had proven that his kindness, his bravery, and his integrity were his defining traits. For the first time in years, Darius felt a surge of confidence. He had faced unimaginable danger and emerged stronger. The doubts and fears that had plagued him for so long seemed smaller now, dwarfed by the enormity of what he had accomplished. The next day, Cora found herself standing at Darius's doorstep, clutching a small potted plant. Her heart pounded as she rehearsed what she wanted to say, but when he opened the door, her carefully planned words evaporated. She hesitated, her voice trembling. "I wanted to thank you. Properly." Darius regarded her with quiet curiosity, his expression neutral but not unkind. "I've been awful to you," Cora admitted, her voice breaking. "I judged you. I mistreated you, and I'm so sorry." Darius studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. Cora felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were mixed with something else: hope. For both of them, the fire had been a crucible, burning away old assumptions and forging something new in its place. Cora couldn't undo the past, but she could work toward making amends. And Darius, for the first time, felt seen, not as a label or a stereotype, but as the person he truly was. In the end, the fire had done more than destroy. It had revealed the truth. And for Cora and Darius, that truth was the foundation of a new beginning. Cora stood at the edge of Darius's driveway, clutching a small plate of freshly baked cookies wrapped in cellophane. Her hands trembled slightly as she took a deep breath and walked to the door. Apologizing wasn't something she had much experience with, but after days of restless nights and introspection, she knew she had to face him. When the door opened, Darius stood before her, his tall frame filling the doorway. His expression was neutral, his deep brown eyes calm but cautious. "Hi, Darius," Cora began, her voice soft but steady. I hope I'm not bothering you." Darius tilted his head slightly, curious but silent. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, her words tumbling out awkwardly. "For everything, for the way I treated you, for the things I said. For the assumptions I made about you." She paused, searching his face for any sign of how he was feeling. His gaze didn't waver, but his silence felt like an invitation to continue. "I was wrong," Cora admitted, her voice breaking. "I let my prejudice blind me to who you are. And after what you did for me—" She trailed off, tears threatening to spill. "I don't even have the words to thank you for saving my life." Darius studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. Encouraged by his response, Cora extended the plate of cookies toward him. "I know this doesn't make up for anything, but I wanted to bring you these." Darius hesitated before taking the plate, his fingers brushing against hers briefly. "Thank you," he said again, his tone soft but sincere. In the weeks that followed, a tentative connection began to grow between them. It started with small gestures, Cora waving at Darius when she saw him outside, Darius nodding back in acknowledgement. One afternoon, as Darius worked in his garden, Cora approached him with a hesitant smile. "Your flowers are beautiful," she said, gesturing to the rows of vibrant blooms. "Thanks," Darius replied, glancing at her before returning to his work. "Do you need any help?" Cora asked, surprising even herself. Darius paused, considering her offer. "Sure," he said finally, handing her a small trowel. As they worked side by side, Cora found herself asking questions about the plants and listening intently to Darius's answers. She was struck by his depth of knowledge and his quiet passion for gardening. Over time, their conversations grew more personal. Cora shared bits of her own life, her struggles as a single mother, her fears during the wildfire. Darius listened, offering insights that were thoughtful and, at times, unexpectedly profound. "I've learned," he said one day, "that kindness isn't about how people treat you. It's about who you choose to be." Cora felt a pang of guilt, but also a sense of hope. If Darius could choose kindness after everything he had endured, maybe she could learn to be better too. The transformation in their relationship didn't go unnoticed. Neighbors who had once gossiped alongside Cora now watched in amazement as she and Darius began spending more time together. The sight of them chatting on his porch or working in the garden became a regular occurrence, challenging the assumptions people had made about both of them. For Darius, the change brought a newfound sense of belonging. While he had always been content with solitude, the bridge he and Cora were building reminded him of the value of connection. For Cora, the journey was humbling, but necessary. Each interaction with Darius taught her something new, not just about him, but about herself and the biases she was working to unlearn. In the end, their relationship became a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over judgment and kindness over division. Together, they proved that even the deepest rifts could be mended with courage, humility, and a willingness to change. The story of Darius's heroic rescue quickly became the talk of the neighborhood. What started as murmurs of disbelief evolved into heartfelt conversations. Neighbors, who once turned a blind eye to subtle biases and injustices, began reflecting on their own behavior. Community gatherings were held, fostering open discussions about acceptance, prejudice, and the value of every individual, regardless of their differences. Through it all, Darius remained humble, his actions speaking louder than any words ever could. For the neighborhood, Darius became more than just a resident. He was a beacon of quiet strength and resilience. People who had barely acknowledged him now stopped to greet him, offer help in his garden, or simply sit with him on his porch for a conversation. The fire had taken much, but it had also kindled something powerful. A newfound respect and admiration for a man who had taught the community what true humanity looked like. Cora's transformation was equally striking. She emerged from the ordeal not only with gratitude, but with a mission. Using her connections and influence, she became a vocal advocate for inclusivity and understanding. She organized neighborhood events that celebrated diversity and invited speakers to educate others on autism, racial bias, and the importance of empathy. "Darius taught me," she said at one such event, "that kindness and courage can break down walls built by ignorance. It's time we all start building bridges instead." The story of Darius and Cora left an indelible mark, proving that even the most fractured relationships could be mended through compassion and understanding. As the neighborhood flourished with newfound unity, it served as a powerful reminder. The smallest acts of bravery and kindness can ignite the greatest change. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share it with your friends and family to spread the message of compassion and understanding. Let's work together to create a world where kindness triumphs over hate. Follow us for more stories that inspire change and celebrate the strength of the human spirit.